Welcome to our February webinar, a collaborative presentation of the Federation for Children with Special Needs and the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center. My name is Janie Kreco, and I am the Training and Support Specialist at the RTSC. Today's webinar is Every Student Succeeds Act, Promoting School Stability for Kids in Foster Care, presented by Marlies Spanjaard, the Director of Education Advocacy for the Edlaw Project, an initiative of the Children's Law Center of Massachusetts and the Youth Advocacy and Children and Family Law Divisions. As the Director of Education Advocacy, Ms. Spanjaard is responsible for supervising staff attorneys and interns, and making program-wide policy decisions, and conducting statewide trainings on education-related issues with a specific focus on representing court-involved youth. She earned her JD and her M.S.W. at Washington University Law School and George Warren Brown School of Social Work in St. Louis, Missouri. During the webinar, please type your questions in the toolbox, and we will try and answer them during the presentation. Past webinars are archived on the RTSC webinar, along with many resources on trauma and learning and educational issues that impact students and child welfare. Welcome, Marlies. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to talk today about Every Student Succeeds Act and really what does it mean for kids in foster care. It is a big law that has a lot of implications about how we're doing testing and accountability for youth across the state, but we're going to focus today specifically on the school stability piece. And we're going to go through kind of what school stability looks like today for kids in Massachusetts, and then we're going to go through the three laws that really impact kids, and we're going to talk about McKinney-Vento, we're going to talk about the Fostering Connections, and then we're going to talk about Every Student Succeeds Act and how it changes and adapts those laws to support kids in foster care.
Go down to the end. Yeah.
Okay. So the first thought is just really wanting to talk about why do we care about school stability? What are the issues? And instead of hearing from me, I'm actually going to start us off with a video of a young woman who is going to share her experience of what it was like in foster care and school and just kind of the struggles that she faced, because I think it's really important to hear directly from youth who are impacted by this issue.
I'm 21 years old. I live in New Britain. I'm a full-time student at Intercept College, and I have a 1-year-old daughter. I've been here, as I said, basically my whole life. I've been in over 20 placements, a mixture of foster homes, residential placements, group home shelters, and I've switched schools, as I said, conservatively about 10 times. It's hard to keep track. And it's very difficult, especially when, we want, particularly myself, I'm in college now, but I think the goal for most foster youth is to go on to college and to get higher education, and it's really difficult when, someone like myself has switched schools so many times, you don't have a solid foundation, basically. When I was in middle school is when I did most of my transitioning, I guess you put it. And it's tough. You have to move to a new home and adapt to those rules and those people there, and then you have a new community, and then you have a new school, and school alone is difficult, and also peer groups and your academics, and it's really hard to focus. I know you need to focus and learn and really absorb information if you're bounced from one place to another, and nobody knows where you're at in your schooling, and you don't know, as a 9 or 10-year-old or even a 14-year-old, you're not really sure where you're supposed to be, and nobody else is really sure where you're supposed to be, so you kind of just get lost in the shuffle. And then you go into new schools, or even if it's the same school you come back to, you feel inferior because you're not as adept to the environment, you're not as adept in certain skills that other kids seem to master very easily, like math and English. I still have issues with simple multiplication and division, and it's really hard to explain to somebody who's like, why can't you do it? I was a foster kid, and I was bounced around a million times. And it kind of it doesn't get better, it only gets worse. The more you move, the more weakness and a problem it becomes. I have issues. I used to be great at math. I remember, going through 5th grade, and then in 6th grade is when I really started bouncing back and forth, and since then, I wasn't able to master the simple, basic math things, and now I'm in college, and I have a statistics class, and I'm struggling through it, and it's really difficult, but, I have to make a really concerted, conscious effort to understand my weaknesses and make sure that I'm doing what I have to do, because I know that, in the end, it's worth it. But a lot of kids don't. They don't have the support that they need from their families or from the schools, as I didn't, and they can't speak up for themselves because they're too young, or they're just busy trying to figure out where they're going to live the next day. And it really shouldn't happen that way, because we have a lot of young, bright kids in the system, and they just, once again, they just get lost. I do have friends who bounced around till the day they signed out, or, decided to go to college, and they tried it, and unfortunately it wasn't for them, because, they didn't have the necessary skills or support to really be able to make it in that environment. And to me, that's what school is about. You have to have, a set of skills. And if there's no one, if you're in DCS, my thing is that DCS responsibility is to ensure that, as a parent would, that, kids have certain things that they need in life, and the biggest thing that I can see is a good education and the opportunity to that. So if they're not ensuring that kids have certain skills and that they're going to be able to be successful when they do go to college that DCS pays for, then, someone's not doing your job correctly, I guess. And it's not fair. I think that foster kids really should have the same opportunities that any other child has in the educational system, and that means that, we need to make sure that things like moving don't affect a child's educational career for the rest of their life. To have more foster kids really succeeding at the levels that they can and should be succeeding and haven't been for so long. Then you go to 4-year college and you graduate, and then you can become a productive member of society instead of just another statistic of a homeless foster child, or just lost in the system like so many do. And it's a really good investment, and it needs to be done.
So, I think she does a really good job of kind of highlighting some of the issues that happen for children in foster care, with delays in enrollment, delays in records, loss of credits, transferring school to school, really struggling to have the right services, and just the lack of stable adult supports relationships in the school. And the national data supports all of this, and really shares some real concerns about the mobility that kids in foster care face, that they are often having multiple placements, 3.38 living placements on average for school-age kids, that 56 to 75% of them are actually changing schools when they first enter the system, and just the multiple school experiences. Imagine being 18 years old and having been to 5 different schools, and very often having then 5 different homes as well, and just the kind of upheaval that kids are having to kind of navigate as they go through this. And it impacts the outcomes. The 17 to 18-year-olds in foster care are 2 times as likely to be suspended and 3 times as likely to be expelled as other students. And then when you look at the overall achievement, only 2% of children aging out of foster care are attaining their bachelor's degrees, compared to 24% in the general population. So that's obviously not ideal. And Massachusetts also, if you look at the correlation between the number of high schools attended and the percentage of students graduating in 4 years, the more mobility, the less likely children are to graduate. The dropout rates increase as the number of high schools attended increase. And if you look also at the number of children that have been placed out of home in recent time, if you look just at the dip, the change, in 2012 we were somewhere at the kind of low 7,000, and in August of 2016 we're at about 9,500. So there's also been a big increase in the number of kids that are actually placed in foster care. of those kids that are in foster care, the likelihood of being having 3 or more placement obviously greatly increases the longer that a child is in foster care. Kids that have been in foster care over 2 years have a 75% chance of having been in 3 or more placements. And then the MCAS testing, also, if you look at just all students versus students in DCF custody, the MCAS scores are significantly lower for children in DCF custody than they are for all students. So now that I've painted that really fairly depressing and unfortunate situation, I want to talk about the laws that impact school stability and the different things that we can do to support children in foster care. The way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to look at the 3 laws. We're going to go in order of laws that already existed before ESSA and then talk about how ESSA changes things. So the 3 relevant laws that we're going to discuss today is one, McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which has been around since 1987. And then in 2008, the Fostering Connections to Success in Increasing Adoptions Act, kind of a mouthful, but that's from 2008. And then now we have, in 2016, the foster care provisions that were added to Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education, ESSA. So McKinney-Vento has been around since 1987. It applies to public school districts throughout the law. If you look at the actual law, it says LEAs, the lead educational agency. That essentially means school districts. And the purpose of the law is essentially to give children a stable education even though their housing may be unstable. They may be changing, living in different districts, but the idea is that the education that they receive should try and remain stable as possible. And homeless, the definition of homeless is very broad. So it may be beyond the kind of typical definition of actually, not with any sort of home at all, but living in shelters, children living in motels, living in cars, and even doubled up in family members. So it's possible that, there is literally a home for the child, but if there are, 16 people living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, that would also qualify a child as homeless under the definition of McKinney-Vento. And then prior to December 10th, the definition of homeless also included basically children in STAR placements, hotline homes, and other temporary placements. So this was a law that was used to promote school stability for kids that were had been removed from their homes and in different placements through DCF. So what McKinney-Vento says is that a child may stay either in the school of origin and receive transportation provided by the school, or immediately enroll in the new district where they're living, even without records and immunizations and all of that. So the child had the choice that if they, were living in District A and became homeless and were now maybe living temporarily in District B, to either remain in school in District A with transportation provided by the school districts, or to move to District B and immediately enroll in the school there. In 2008, there was the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008. It is a mouthful every time that I say it, so I'm going to call it Fostering Connections for short. This is a child welfare law, which is incredibly important when we talk about kind of how we use these laws in terms of advocacy, because the child welfare law can't regulate the schools. It is a law that can have an impact on DCF, but cannot mandate that the schools do anything in particular. But again, the idea of Fostering Connections was to promote permanent families and improve education and healthcare for kids in foster care. The data has been around for a while. It's not a surprise that kids are not doing well. And it's nice that, the legislature is responding. So Fostering Connection essentially created obligations on DCF for school stability, and not necessarily on the schools, but specifically for DCF. And what it said is that every child's case plan must include insurances that DCF decision for foster care actually take into account the child's school placement. So when, at the very beginning, before a child is even in foster care, that when DCF is making a decision about should the child be going to foster care and where should the child be going to foster care, that there are actually in that case plan that DCF has thought specifically about, where's the child in school, what are we doing with school, and can we think of a foster placement that is close to the school placement so that the child can have some stability there. It further says that if the child is, once the child has actually been placed in foster care, that DCF and the school district, the LEA again, work together to coordinate that the child remains in the school of origin unless it's not in their best interest. So there's this presumption that the school of origin is in the child's best interest under Fostering Connections, and then only if it is contrary to the child's best interest should the child be moved from their original school district. The transportation is often the sticking point for all of the school stability stuff. Transportation is incredibly expensive from district to district. I believe there was an estimate that if all the children in foster care were transported, it's millions of dollars that we're talking about. So transportation generally is part of the concern. But Fostering Connection also says that the state child welfare agency can use federal funds to provide reasonable travel for children to remain in their school of origin, and that is through, cited in the child welfare policy manual. The other thing Fostering Connection said is that if the school of origin is not in the best interest of the child, the DCF and the school district must provide immediate enrollment into the new school district. That DCF and the LEA are supposed to work together to make sure the records get to where they need to go, but that it should not delay enrollment. There should be immediate enrollment under Fostering Connections. Now we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, and there's all sorts of fun acronyms here just on this slide alone. So, it came in 2015. It was signed in December of 2015. The implementation dates of ESSA, if you just want to have fun looking at this, even just Google ESSA implementation and you will find very different information on when the implementation dates are and what starts when, and it's very confusing. But essentially, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, so the ESEA, which is from 1965, has both Title I protections and Title IX protections. And the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, made Title I amendments and Title IX amendments. So the Title I amendments are specifically about school stability for foster care youth, and the Title IX amendments really update and change McKinney-Vento and are about the school stability for homeless youth. So they're both under ESSA, but they are in different areas, and they've amended different things of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which also was No Child Left Behind. So Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and then it became No Child Left Behind, and now it is No Child Left Behind is gone, and we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, and then there's the Title I part and the Title IX part. So part of what is confusing in all of this is figuring out what everything is being called and how everything is being named. Is it, under ESSA, or are they Title I amendments? So we're going to stick to, they are the Title I amendments and the Title IX amendments under Every Student Succeeds Act. And then we'll go through and make it clear what parts apply to school stability for foster youth, what applies for school stability for homeless youth, what is still in play, what has been changed, and hopefully by the end it will all make sense, and if not, we will certainly have time for questions to make sure that it's clear. So the first McKinney-Vento amendment under the ESSA. So this is a Title IX amendment. This was effective December 10th, 2016. And essentially, the whole piece of the foster care kids being under McKinney-Vento has been changed. So the definition of homeless under McKinney-Vento no longer includes the children who are awaiting foster care placement. So the STAR beds, the emergency placements, that is now no longer covered under McKinney-Vento. It is now covered under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that is the first major change that has happened. Effective October 1, 2016, there is the fact that formerly homeless children entitled to transportation through the end of the year, which the homelessness resolves. And you can argue that children awaiting foster care before December 10th are now formally homeless and should be able to remain in the school of origin with transportation provided by the school. So even though, some of the language has changed, some of the advocacy for the kids can remain the same. And one of the things we're going to talk about is just at the beginning of this month, the DESE issued some guidance about what Massachusetts is going to do with all of this through the end of the school year. So we will talk about that as well. The other thing that changed is effective October 1, the school of origin means the school district of origin. This used to be the case, and then DESE issued guidance, I think it was a year or two ago, that specifically said that school of origin meant school building of origin, and this became a real issue for some children, that if they were in elementary school and became homeless during that time, if they were in 4th grade going to 5th grade, that was no problem. They were able to stay. But for some children, if they were moving from, say, middle school to high school, and they were in 8th grade moving to 9th grade, the DESE guidance essentially said that that is not the same school building of origin, and so that child would need to go to the new school district, which caused a lot of problems for families with multiple children, where some of the children had the right to stay in the school district of origin and some did not. When I asked about that once, I was told essentially that they can all stay together in the new school district, so there is that option, but the whole point of McKinney-Vento was, the school stability. So really happy to see this change really spelled out, that school of origin means school district of origin. So if a child becomes homeless between middle and high school, they may continue on to go from middle to high school in the school district of origin. Okay, so the Title I protections under ESSA, this is where they've really kind of spelled out the school stability piece in ESSA. And as of December 10th, all children in foster care have the right to remain in their school of origin, again, unless it's contrary to their best interests. So the school district and DCF must collaborate. So, this is one of those big federal laws that says, hey, states, figure it out. And that is essentially what ESSA says to school districts and DCF and to DESE and then all the local school districts. They said, hi, we're the feds. This is a new law. All children have the right to remain in their school of origin. Figure it out. And so that gets a little complicated because the different states do things differently, and figuring out exactly how this is all going to work out has been an interesting experience, I know, for both the school districts, DCF, and DESE. So questions that kind of remained for the states to figure out is, well, who makes this best interest determination, and who provides and pays for the transportation? And so the piece to it is that if it's not in the best interest to remain in the school of origin, then child must be immediately enrolled in the new school district. And the new school district can't say, oh, we're not ready for you, we don't have your records. They have to immediately enroll And then the enrolling school is supposed to contact the last school attended to get the records, but it is not supposed to delay enrollment. It should be immediate. Kids should not be sitting in foster homes or in star beds waiting to go to school. It should be an immediate enrollment. Another thing that is new with ESSA is that each school district must establish a point of contact for foster children. The way it was written in the federal law is that this was a requirement if DCF designated their own point of contact, and if DCF did that, then all the school districts had to do it. So there was a little bit of a, is this happening, is this not happening? But it is happening. And then the school districts and DESE have to collect and report data on school outcomes for foster children. So I'm going to step really quickly over to the accountability part of ESSA. So under ESSA, which is where all the new guidance about how we're going to see how kids are doing, right, all the kind of MCAS and accountability, that kind of part of ESSA that doesn't specifically relate to kids in foster care, does for the first time have a carve-out for the outcomes for kids in foster care. So school districts that have more than 20 children in foster care have to collect and report specifically on foster care children as a subgroup when they are reporting out their accountability numbers. So what exists out there to kind of help us figure this out? There's a lot of federal guidance. So the Department of Ed, the U.S. Department of Ed, published their final regulations. There is some non-regulatory guidance. And then there is a fairly recent U.S. Department of Ed Dear Colleague letter that again really spells out the importance of school stability for children in foster care and really wanting to improve the outcomes. And then kind of very recently, just at the beginning of this month, the Massachusetts Department of Ed put out their own guidance about this. And one of the things that DESE guidance says is that for the remainder of this school year, they are going to put the transportation costs essentially on the school districts. That if a child needs transportation, that the school districts are going to do it. So that answers one of the big questions as to how this is going to play out. It's not a long-term answer, but it's certainly a step in the right direction as we kind of figure out how ESSA is going to apply to kids in Massachusetts. There's also a DCF DESE joint memo on Fostering Connections. You'll notice I didn't say anything about this law changing anything in Fostering Connections. It didn't. Fostering Connections is still up and running, and this new law actually is a really great complement to Fostering Connections because it continues to support this idea that it is in the best interest of children to stay in their school of origin and really to promote policies that allow kids to do that. But there is the McKinney-Vento policies and procedures that has also been updated on the DESE website. The DCF education policy and the Mass DESE memo to schools regarding ESSA. All of this exists and all of this supports this kind of ongoing thought. And the DCF education policy also specifically talks about, the importance of these decisions to keep kids as close to their schools as possible and to promote school stability as they go forward. Okay, so now those are the laws, but what do we do with them and how do we figure out who falls under the protection of which law and how are we making sense of this? So this is a chart that is probably, it's the size of your screen right now, but if you print this out, will probably be very small. So one thing we can figure out to do is how to kind of get this out. I can email this out to participants, or you can contact me, or there's some contact information at the end of this PowerPoint with 3 people that all have access to this. But this is essentially a chart to look at, all right, when did the kid enter foster care? What kind of foster placement was it? and then what law applies, and how do we figure this out. So, looking at it, if a child enters foster care before or after December 10th in any type of placement, ESSA is going to be in play, and Fostering Connections, because nothing in Fostering Connections has changed. So the protections are going to be both from ESSA and Fostering Connections. And then if they've entered before December 10th, you may have some McKinney-Vento protections as well. So depending on the scenario, you should be able to piece any child into this chart with a kind of across the line as to how does this work and what laws apply. So we do have this in a one-pager, and happy to send it out. This was created by Jessica Berry at Children's Law Center, and the Children's Law Center has also created a resource page for ESSA. So that their website is clcm.org, and if you look on there, there's specific information and supports for ESSA. So now I want to talk about some strategies for actually making sure that kids are getting the option for school stability. And there's kind of three big issues. One is home and foster placement stability. 2, avoiding school transfer. And 3, if transfer occurs, immediate enrollment in the school. So the first one is really at the very beginning, if possible, really trying to be part of the discussion about foster and school placement, foster home and school placement. So, if you are either a DCF worker or in touch with the DCF worker, really thinking about, how are we promoting school through these foster home placements? I know it is frustrating. One of the issues that I know is frustrating for DCF is there are not enough foster homes. In certain areas, the closest foster home may be miles away from where the child lives. And so DCF may not have an option, when they're looking at foster homes to, find a foster home that is in close proximity to where the child is in school. It's not always an option, but sometimes it is an option. So really trying to really be thoughtful about how decisions about where the child is going to live are made. If you are already involved with a child in foster care, request to be notified before a child is moved, so that if you're a special ed surrogate parent, you may have a lot of information about what's going on at school. If the child is a special education student and has a very robust IEP, and moving a child to a new district is going to, really disrupt what's not only been working, maybe the foster home placement isn't working out, but maybe school is the one place that the child is having success, and you want to be, a part of that conversation and sharing that knowledge with DCF about, the impact of the move on the child. And potentially talk with the child's attorney about filing motions to challenge DCF's placement decision. So there may be times where you feel the placement decision isn't appropriate, or there might be a better placement decision that could impact school stability. And so you may want to be having a conversation with the child's attorney about whether that's an appropriate motion at that point. So often, though, that decision has already been made, and so then it's thinking about how do we avoid school transfer. So if you've got a child that is going to move foster homes, but really think about how do we ensure school stability. So this is where I was saying the Title I protections of ESSA and Fostering Connections really do complement each other. They really essentially say the same thing. School stability is important. We want children to stay in their school of origin and really support their continued learning. So really thinking about, the determination that it is in the child's best interest. One of the things that was frustrating about Fostering Connections is that it said children can stay in their school of origin, but if they move to another district, technically under Fostering Connections, the school district doesn't have to keep them if they no longer live in that school district, right? It's different if they're homeless, but if they have actually moved to a foster home in a new district, under Fostering Connections, it was up to the school district to say, yes, we're willing to keep this child. Well, it's no longer up to the school district. The Title I protections of ESSA allow for that child to stay. So, really thinking about what do you need to do in terms of advocating that it is in the child's best interest to stay in the school of origin, and then figuring out who is providing and paying for transportation. We know now that through the end of the school year, the school districts will be providing that transportation. DCF decides the best interests, right? That is part of their mandate. So their current considerations is a whole long list of things, in terms of what does the child want? How are we making sure that the family relationships and engagement continues? What's going, what age and grade level is the child? How long have they been in that school? Is a move really going to impact them that much? If it's a child who's been in the same school system and it's their senior year, right, that is something that should be taken into consideration. And then distance, length of travel time. Generally speaking, the DESE guidance has said an hour isn't a reasonable amount of time, and anything more than an hour is not reasonable to expect the school districts to transport a child over an hour to their school of origin. How many foster care placements has this child experienced? And then also, what is the goal, right? If this child is going to be in foster care placement and we know it's only going to be 3 or 6 months and, the goal is reunification, then, we don't really probably want to move that child to a new district if we're just going to move them back in 3 to 6 months. And so really figuring out what, does reunification mean reunification soon, or does it mean that's the goal, but it's not really likely to happen? So thinking about that as well. But who is going to provide transportation is not supposed to be a consideration. And again, under the new guidance, this is less going to be an issue for this school year, but it should not be an issue going forward either. It's not part of a best interest determination for the child. So then thinking about, the different ways to advocate. So advocate with DCF, so work with the DCF caseworker, the education coordinator, or the area office point of contact. Just so you know, the area office point of contact is not going to be I forget what they're called. There's an education coordinator at each of the DCF offices, but those are not DCF employees. They're a contracted agency with DCF, and so they are not going to be the same as the point of contact. They may have information and may be helpful, but the area office's point of contact is going to be an actual DCF employee, not one of their contracted agencies. DCF is creating an entire dispute resolution process for any concerns about decisions that they are making about the best interest determination. So, it may be that you don't agree with the decision, or the parent doesn't agree with the decision that was made. So there is a DCF dispute resolution process. And then also work with the attorney on the case. Perhaps there is a motion there saying that, DCF has failed to comply with this law to support school stability. So there is, Fostering Connections, DCF and DESE memorandum, and then the DCF and DESE education policy that was created together that talks a lot about, again, the support for school stability being really important. And, they have come out and said that themselves, so, it is important that they are following through on what they're saying and supporting students. Again, sometimes it's very difficult depending on the foster home options, but really the new law really does, give some real foundation for pushing this issue. And then also, talking with the local school districts. So contact the school of origin about keeping the child enrolled. Sometimes, although it shouldn't necessarily be the issue, transportation is the issue. So helping to find and identify transportation. If you are aware of different transportation companies that maybe are already doing a certain route or, are available, help and try and identify that. There's no reason we can't kind of all work together to support getting these things done. And then, if the school is not cooperating, then there's always support at DESE. And there's also going to be DESE, a formal dispute resolution process as well. So we're still waiting what that's going to look like, but there are a couple of different dispute resolution processes that are currently in the mix. And then if not, there's always the problem resolution system, what used to be PQA, if there are concerns about a particular district. But really, I think a lot of what we've seen so far is that kind of everybody is a little bit kind of scratching their heads on how does this work. So, it may be that sometimes it's not malicious, it's just, people aren't sure what to do and how to do it. So the more we can kind of share the information and support schools and, the different agencies involved to work together to get this done. And then, the McKinney-Vento, although it has changed, it is still a valid resource for kids that are that may still fit in the definition of homeless. One area that you could think about is children on the run. So children that are in DCF custody, maybe have a foster home placement, but are actually not at their foster home placement and maybe on the run. Certainly they would fit under the definition of homeless, because if they are couch surfing or not with a fixed nightly home, then they would also fit there. So they might have some supports under McKinney-Vento. And then the formerly homeless children are still entitled to transportation through the end of the year when their homelessness resolves. So the third area is immediate enrollment. So if the child, it's not in their best interest to remain in their school of origin, and it does make sense to perhaps start them in the new school district. So if they're living really far away, sometimes, this may be a situation where, a child is in their school of origin, and in some special education scenarios, they are floundering and maybe really not having a very good time at all, or this, there's concern about the appropriateness of services. Sometimes a fresh start may absolutely be in the child's best interest. And so, if it's not an emergency and this is happening, then, ensure that DCF and the school plan for the transfer of records. And once the child is moved, really making sure that DCF understands that there's a immediate enrollment. So, supporting whoever is going to actually bring the child to the school, letting the schools know that they don't require any records. They must be immediately enrolled. And again, this is also an area, if you are somebody that, if you're not the school or you're not DCF, but you have records already, it can be incredibly helpful if you bring the records as well. If you're the special ed surrogate parent, for example, and you have that child's IEP and they're moving, and bring it to the new school, help the process along. There's a lot of bureaucracy that happens with, who has to contact who. In some of the larger school districts, it's not easy to get the records in a timely manner. So if you have them, then support this process and support the child by making sure the new school district has what they need. And again, there's a bunch of different resources here. The school liaisons, having the different DESE points of contact, the DCF point of contact, and if absolutely necessary, if for some reason it's not happening, you can always talk to the attorney about filing a motion in juvenile court for immediate enrollment. So the three kind of main takeaways for the ESSA is that All foster children have the right to remain in their school of origin under the new provisions of ESSA Title I. All foster children have the right to immediately enroll if they are moving to a new school. And foster children in STAR programs and temporary shelters are no longer considered homeless under McKinney-Vento, but may be considered formally homeless and still do have the right to under the new rights under ESSA. So although they got moved from McKinney-Vento, they still the same basic rights still exist now under ESSA. So just some helpful resources. So this is a page of McKinney-Vento resources. The DESE website has a lot of helpful information. The homeless liaisons are listed on the DESE website. And then there's also the Office of Education for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. Sarah Slaughterback is the statewide coordinator. She is a wealth of information and can be incredibly helpful when looking at these different scenarios. For Fostering Connections, again, right, this is a child welfare law. There's a lot of information out there on Foster Connections, the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, the DCF Education Policy and related documents are online. And this is the website I mentioned earlier. The Children's Law Center has created a whole page dedicated to school stability with this information. The DCS area education coordinators that are contracted. And then Shirley Fanchan is the new manager for education services at DCF, who is helping to oversee the implementation of Fostering Connections and also, working with DESE together to do the implementation of ESSA on the state side. And then ESSA, there's lots of kind of federal non-regulatory guidance. Again, the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education has a wealth of resources. And Elizabeth Harris, who used to be in the homeless office with Sarah Slaughterback, is now basically heading the foster care initiative at Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and will also be a support moving forward. So this is the contact information for myself at the bottom. Amy Karp, who is the Director of Training for CPCS, and Jessica Berry at the Children's Law Center of Massachusetts. We together kind of worked on creating this PowerPoint and are trying to get this information out across the state. And any one of us would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, Marlies, thank you so much. So the single page chart that you showed us, I have not sent out the PDF of the presentation yet. So I could maybe wait and have you send me that,
Sure.
And I will send that all out to everybody who had registered for the webinar.
Great.
So you can expect that in your email. We do have a couple of questions already in. So, and then if the audience can start typing in questions that they may have, that would be great. So some of them are specific to special ed, if you don't mind.
No.
So, and this is a question that comes up quite a bit with our special education surrogate parents. When a student moves while being evaluated for special ed, what is the obligation of the new district? Does the new district get to start over on the timeline, or do they have to attempt to stay within the timelines based on the beginning or the signature date of the evaluations? I know the answer, but I talk about it a little bit.
Sure. What I have seen is essentially the new district gets to start over. The way the special ed law is written is about the districts and their evaluation, and so they, districts feel generally very strongly about their own evaluators and having the process done through kind of their district. I have had scenarios where a district will use another district's testing. I have had a situation where the testing was completed and then the child moved, and the district was willing to take that. I have also had one where the testing was completed and the new district was not willing to, they were willing to look at it, but they weren't willing to say it was kind of their evaluation.
Yes, yep.
So that's a very frustrating experience, but it could also be one of the advocacy reasons why, you are asking DCF to consider that it would not be in the child's best interest to move, that especially if the child's in an evaluation process or it's completed, that is another reason why school stability is incredibly important for that child, and that the child should not be moving districts.
And so the ESSA law about moving documents after the fact, so to speak, does not apply to special ed?
Not specifically. I don't think there's any mention specific to the testing or evaluations or anything like that.
All right. Because that does get very frustrating. A lot of these kids are moved in the midst of the evaluations, and then it just gets set back a bit. A curious question here is one of the SESPs is saying that her student has a lot of attorneys. So which would be the attorney that would be the most helpful with the education piece?
Well, that really depends. I would say the child's attorney for court in the care and protection case should be the one that could be helpful for the school stability piece, because they are the only one that has access to a juvenile court judge who may be able to enforce, some of the emotion against DCF if that's the issue. That being said, my project, the whole point of the Edlaw Project is to support kids that are court involved. So if you are having difficulty either reaching that attorney or that attorney is being non-responsive, we are certainly willing to answer any questions and also potentially step in to offer some direct support to that attorney, or if there's something that we can do ourselves, we could do that as well.
Thank you. That's good to know. And then a question of clarification about the star beds. So kids in star beds are no longer considered homeless. That is true until the end of but they are considered homeless till the end of the year, right? Isn't that what they said?
They're not necessarily considered homeless, but they are, yes, they're essentially saying that they're going to continue McKinney-Vento as is, even though legally they're no longer considered homeless.
Yes.
But the DESE guidance said that essentially for the rest of this school year, it's kind of business as usual.
Yes.
Under McKinney-Vento, it's just not, they don't technically need to do it that way, but that's how they've
and I think just for ease of transition,
Yeah, so just as I talk about how everything's different, right? Some things are going to stay the same.
And then there's also a question about school of origin. Now, the school of origin, or the school district of origin, I guess now, that's determined. That is the LEA, right? That's the person who is paying, for example, and for SESPs, paying for the IEP services, right?
Yeah.
And if they're not on an IEP, how do they determine what the school of origin is?
It's literally, the school that the child was attending at the time they entered foster care.
Okay, so it is when they enter foster care.
Yeah, so one question that came up was for children that, had a school of origin and then moved to foster care and were enrolled in that district, and then ESSA came out. Does that mean they can go back to their school of origin? And unfortunately, no. It's were they, if they were in foster care, that then becomes their school of origin. So they, if they move and then they move, their school of origin is going to potentially change as well. So, if you grew up in District A and then were moved and enrolled in District B, and then were moved and enrolled to, or, we're moving to District C, your school of origin is going to be District B, not District A. Okay. It's going to be, basically your school of origin changes when you enroll in a new school, and you don't get
on where you live
to go back
unless you're on an IEP.
Potentially, right?
Yes.
Depending on the programmatic and fiscal responsibility, right?
That just adds another layer of complexity.
It does. Yes, it does.
All right. Let's see. What do you do when schools immediately register student but no student placement is made until the new school receives records, such as transcripts? That is not the new law. They must, right?
Right. Okay. They must immediately enroll. And enroll doesn't just mean we've put you on our rolls and we, have you sit at home while we figure out what we're going to do with you. Certainly if you have a complicated IEP, there may be, a couple of days that you want to give a school district to figure out where, you shouldn't, let me in and I'm walking, right? Ideally that, but there's also the reality of, sometimes it's a little more complicated than that. But it certainly shouldn't be, please wait 3 weeks while we figure out what's going on and find a slot there. It's supposed to be immediate enrollment.
Okay. And if the school records are not sent, soon thereafter, that's really up to school and DCF to figure out who's going to do that, right?
Yes, okay. School and DCF to figure out how to get them, or depending how old the child is. That's another thing that in Massachusetts, a child has the right to their own school records starting at age 14.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, it can be with a release, but a child at 14 can have total access to their own student record. So
that actually might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, getting their own record. Yeah. This could also be a scenario where, should the attorney have to file, a motion for like a subpoena for the records? Mm-hmm. Hopefully not. But there is always, that resource if it gets to that level. Mm-hmm. I would really hope not, but there are some districts that are fairly frustrating to get records out of. Mm-hmm. And also, knowing that if you're not DCF or you're not the school district, but you're trying to get the school records, sometimes you request school records and you get whatever comes out of the Aspen system, or and it's like 5 pages, and you're like, this child has been in special ed for 12 years. I'm fairly certain there's more school records than this. Right. They may not, I would say talk to each other, talk to the different resources that exist in the district that you work in, so that you know how to get a full and complete copy of the record to pass on to the new school district.
Okay. Let's see. We've got, let me just read this because it's three different questions here. There's a group home. It just has enrolled. So the school of origin. Okay, so I think that the SCSP is asking about, it's the age-old question about not believing that the placement that the student has been put into, perhaps in the school of origin, is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to, I think, just going back to the team, and the appropriateness of the placement within the school of origin is up to the team.
Right. There's nothing in ESSA that really alters the special education rights. So if the placement was a concern, and it may be that you're thinking, well, maybe the new district where the child is in foster care is going to be better, but you still have every dispute resolution option you had in District A if the child is staying in District A, to deal with the special education placement. It doesn't enhance, but it also doesn't detract from any of those rights.
And the dispute resolution things that DCF and DESI are working up, they're not available yet, are they?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah. Do we have any idea about a timeline for that?
Don't. Yeah.
I think they're probably foreseeing the future. Especially after the school year.
I probably wouldn't imagine, especially now with this new guidance.
Yes. That
we'll see anything perhaps this school year, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so we have maybe another minute left. If anybody has a last question, please type it in. Otherwise, we will be sending out the PDF to you along with the single-page chart and the survey. And we will see you next month. And Marlies, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.